Hello, I'm Nalani Brown, reading you an Agatha Christie story called Grenshaw's Folly. The two men rounded the corner of the Sherberry. "Well, there you are," said Raymond West. "That's it." Horace Bindler took a deep, appreciative breath. "But my dear," he cried, "how wonderful." His voice rose in a high screech of aesthetic delight and then deepened in reverent awe. "It's unbelievable, out of this world, a period piece of the best." "I thought you'd like it," said Raymond West complacently. "Like it, my dear," words failed Horace. He unbuckled the strap of his camera and got busy. "This will be one of the gems of my collection," he said happily. "I do think, don't you, that it's rather amusing to have a collection of monstrosities? The idea came to me one night 7 years ago in my bath. My last real gem was in the Campo Santo at Genoa, but I recently think this beats it." "What's it called?" "I haven't the idea," said Raymond. "I suppose it's got a name." "It must have, but the fact is, it's never referred to around here as anything but Grenshaw's Folly." "Grenshaw being the man who built it?" "Yes, in 1860, or 70, or thereabouts. The local success story of the time. Barefoot boy who had risen to immense prosperity. Local opinion is divided as to why he built this house, whether it was sheer exuberance of wealth or whether it was done to impress his creditors. If the matter, it didn't impress them. He either went bankrupt or the next thing to it. Hence the name, Grenshaw's Folly." Horace's camera clicked. "There," he said in a satisfied voice. "Remind me to show you number 310 in my collection. A really incredible marble mantelpiece in the Italian manner." He added, looking at the house, "I can't conceive of how Mr. Grenshaw thought of it all." "Rather obvious in some ways," said Raymond. "He had visited the Chateau of Lior, don't you think? Those turrets. And then, rather unfortunately, he seems to have traveled in the Orient. The influence of the Taj Mahal is unmistakable. I rather like the Moorish wing," he added, "and the traces of a Venetian palace. One wonders how he ever got hold of an architect to carry out these ideas." Raymond shrugged his shoulders. No difficulty about that, I expect," he said. "Probably the architect retired with a good income for the life while poor old Grenshaw went bankrupt." "Could we look at it from the other side?" asked Horace. "Or would that be trespassing?" "We're trespassing all right," said Raymond, "but I don't think it will matter." He turned toward the corner of the house and Horace skipped after him. "But who lives here, my dear? Orphans or holiday visitors? It can't be a school. No playing fields or brisk efficiency." "Oh, a Grenshaw still lives here," said Raymond over his shoulder. "The house itself didn't go in the crash. Old Grenshaw's son inherited it. He was a bit of a miser and lived here in the corner. Never spent a penny. Probably never had a penny to spend. His daughter lives here now. Old lady. Very eccentric." As he spoke, Raymond was congratulating himself on having thought of Grenshaw's Folly as a means for entertaining his guest. These literary critics always profess themselves as longing for a weekend in the country, and were wont to find the country extremely boring when they got there. Tomorrow there would be the Sunday papers, and for today Raymond West congratulated himself on suggesting a visit to Grenshaw's Folly to enrich Horace Bindler's well-known collection of monstrosities. They turned the corner of the house and came out of a neglected lawn. In one corner of it was a large artificial rockery, and bending over it was a figure at sight of which Horace clutched Raymond delightedly by the arm. "My dear," he exclaimed, "do you see what she's got on? A sprigged print dress. Just like a housemaid. When there were housemaids. One of my most cherished memories is staying at a house in the country when I was quite a boy, where a real housemaid called you in the morning, crackling in a print dress and a cap. Yes, my boy, really a cap. Muslin with streamers. No, perhaps it was the parlor maid who had the streamers. But anyway, she was a real housemaid and she brought in an enormous brass can of hot water. What an exciting day we're having." The figure in the print dress had straightened up and turned toward them, trowel in hand. She was a sufficiently startling figure. Unkempt locks of iron gray fell wispily on her shoulders. A straw hat, rather like the hats that horses wear in Italy, was crammed down on her head. The colored print dress she wore fell nearly to her ankles. Out of a weather-beaten, not too clean face, shrewd eyes surveyed them appraisingly. "I must apologize for trespassing, Miss Grenshaw," said Raymond West, as he advanced towards her. "But Mr. Horace Bindler, who is staying with me," Horace bowed and removed his hat, "is most interested in ancient history and fine buildings." Raymond West spoke with the ease of a well-known author who knows that he is a celebrity, that he can venture where other people may not. Miss Grenshaw looked up at the sprawling exuberance behind her. "It is a fine house," she said appreciatively. "My grandfather built it. Before my time, of course. He's reported as having said that he wished to astonish the natives." "I'll say that he did that, ma'am," said Horace Bindler. "Mr. Bindler is a well-known literary critic," said Raymond West. Ms. Grenshaw had clearly no reverence for literary critics. She remained unimpressed. "I consider it," said Miss Grenshaw, referring to the house, "as a monument to my grandfather's genius. Silly fools come here and ask me why I don't sell it and go and live in a flat. What would I do in a flat? It's my home and I live in it," said Miss Grenshaw. "Always have lived here." She considered, brooding over the past. "There were 3 of us. Laura married the curate. Papa wouldn't give her any money. Said clergymen ought to be unworldly. She died having a baby. Baby died too. Nettie ran away with the writing master. Papa cut her out of his will, of course. Handsome fellow, Harry Fletcher, but no good. Don't think Nettie was happy with him anyway. She didn't live long. They had a son. He writes to me sometimes, but of course he isn't a Grenshaw. I'm the last of the Grenshaws." She drew up her bent shoulders with certain pride and readjusted the rakish ankle of the straw hat. Then, turning, she said sharply, "Yes, Mrs. Cresswell, what is it?" Approaching them from the house was a figure that, seen side by side with Miss Grenshaw, seemed ludicrously dissimilar. Mrs. Cresswell had a marvelously dressed head of well-blued hair towering upwards in meticulously arranged curls and rolls. It was as though she had dressed her head to go to a French marquise to a fancy dress party. The rest of her middle-aged person was dressed in what ought to have been rustling black silk, but was actually one of the shinier varieties of black rayon. Although she was not a large woman, she had a well-developed and sumptuous bust. Her voice, when she spoke, was unexpectedly deep. She spoke with exquisite diction, only a slight hesitation over words beginning with H, and the final pronunciation of them with an exaggerated aspirate gave rise to suspicion that at some remote period in her youth she might have had trouble over dropping her H's. "The fish, madam," said Mrs. Cresswell. "The slice of cod. It has not arrived. I have asked Alfred to go down for it, and he refuses to do so." Rather unexpectedly, Miss Grenshaw gave a cackle of laughter. "Refuses, does he? Alfred, madam, has been most disobliging." Miss Grenshaw raised her 2 earth-stained fingers to her lips, suddenly produced an ear-splitting whistle, and at the same time yelled, "Alfred, come here!" Round the corner of the house a young man appeared, in answer to the summons, carrying a spade in his hand. He had a bold, handsome face. As he drew near, he cast an unmistakably malevolent glance towards Mrs. Cresswell. "You wanted me, miss?" he said. "Yes, Alfred. I hear you've refused to go down to the fish. What about it, eh?" Alfred spoke with a surly voice. "I'll go down for it if you wants it, miss. You've only got to say." "I do want it. I want it for my supper." "Right you are, miss. I'll go right away." He threw an insolent glance at Mrs. Cresswell, who flushed and murmured below her breath, "Really, it's unsupportable." Now that I think of it, said Miss Grenshaw, a couple of strange visitors are just what we need, aren't they, Mrs. Cresswell? Mrs. Cresswell looked puzzled. I'm sorry, madame. For you know what, said Miss Grenshaw, nodding her head. Beneficiary to a will mustn't beneficiary to a will mustn't witness it. That's right, isn't it? She appealed to Raymond West. Quite correct, said Raymond. I know enough law to know that, said Miss Grenshaw. And you two are men of standing. She flung down her trowel on her weeding basket. Would you mind coming up to the library with me? Delighted, said Horace, eagerly. She led the way through French windows and through a vast yellow and gold drawing room with faded brocade on the walls and dust covers arranged over the furniture. Then through a large dim hall, up a staircase and into a room on the first floor. My grandfather's library, she announced. Horace looked around the room with acute pleasure. It was a room, from his point of view, quite full of monstrosities. The heads of sphinxes appeared on the most unlikely pieces of furniture. There was a colossal bronze representing, he thought, Paul and Virginia, and a vast bronze clock with classical motifs which he longed to take a photograph of. A fine lot of books, said Miss Grenshaw. Raymond was already looking at the books. From what he could see from a cursory glance, there was no book here of any real interest, or indeed any book which appeared to have been read. They were all superbly bound sets of the classics as supplied 90 years ago for furnishing a gentleman's library. Some novels of a bygone period were included, but they too showed little signs of having been read. Miss Grenshaw was fumbling in the drawers of a vast desk. Finally, she pulled out a parchment document. My will, she explained. Got to leave your money to someone, or so they say. If I died without a will, I suppose my son of a horse Coper would get it. Handsome fellow, Harry Fletcher, but a rogue if there ever was one. Don't see why his son should inherit this place. No, she went on, as though answering some unspoken objection. I've made up my mind. I'm leaving it to Cresswell. Your housekeeper? Yes, I've explained it to her. I make a will leaving her all I've got, and then I don't need to pay her any wages. Saves me a lot in current expenses, and it keeps her up to the mark. No giving me notice and walking off at any minute. Very la-di-da and all that, isn't she? But her father was a working plumber in a very small way. She's nothing to give herself airs about. She had by now unfolded the parchment. Picking up a pen, she dipped it in the inkstand and wrote her signature. Catherine Dorothy Grenshaw. That's right, she said. You've seen me sign it. And then you two sign it, and that makes it legal. She handed the pen to Raymond West. He hesitated a moment, feeling an unexpected repulsion to what he was asked to do. Then he quickly scrawled the well-known signature, for which his morning's mail usually brought at least 6 demands a day. Horace took the pen from him and added his own minute signature. That's done, said Miss Grenshaw. She moved across to the bookcases and stood looking at them uncertainly, and then she opened a glass door, took out a book, and slipped the folded parchment inside. I've my own places for keeping things, she said. Lady Audley's Secret, Raymond West remarked, catching sight of the title as she replaced the book. Miss Grenshaw gave another cackle of laughter. Bestseller in its day, she remarked. Not like your books, eh? She gave Raymond a sudden friendly nudge in the ribs. Raymond was rather surprised that she even knew he wrote books. Although Raymond West was quite a name in literature, he could hardly be described as a bestseller. Though softening a little with the advent of middle age, his books dealt bleakly with the sordid side of life. I wonder, Horace demanded breathlessly, if I might just take a photograph of the clock. By all means, said Miss Grenshaw. It came, I believe, from the Paris exhibition. Very probably, said Horace. He took his picture. This room's not been used much since my grandfather's time, said Miss Grenshaw. The desk's full of old diaries of his. Interesting, I should think. I haven't the eyesight to read them myself. I'd like to get them published, but I suppose one would have to work on them a good deal. You could engage someone to do that, said Raymond West. Could I really? It's an idea, you know. I'll think about it. Raymond West glanced at his watch. We mustn't trespass on your kindness any longer, he said. Pleased to have seen you, said Miss Grenshaw graciously. I thought you were the policeman when I heard you coming around the corner of the house. Why a policeman? Demanded Horace, who never minded asking questions. Miss Grenshaw responded unexpectedly. If you want to know the time, ask a policeman. She caroled, and with this example of Victorian wit, nudged Horace in the ribs and roared with laughter. It's been a wonderful afternoon, sighed Horace as they walked home. Really, that place has everything. The only thing the library needs is a body. Those old-fashioned detective stories about murder in the library, that's just the kind of library I'm sure the authors had in mind. If you want to discuss murder, said Raymond, you just talk to my Aunt Jay. Your Aunt Jay? Do you mean Miss Marple? He felt a little at loss. The charming old world lady to whom he had been introduced the night before seemed the last person to be mentioned in connection with murder. Oh yes, said Raymond. Murder is a specialty of hers. But my dear, how intriguing. What do you really mean? I mean just that, said Raymond. He paraphrased. Some commit murder, some get mixed up in murders, others have murder thirst upon them. My Aunt Jane comes into the third category. You are joking. Not in the least. I can refer you to the former Commissioner of Scotland Yard, several chief constables, and 1 or 2 hard-working inspectors of the CID. Horace said happily that wonders would never cease. Over the table, they gave Joan West, Raymond's wife, Lou Oxley, her niece, and old Miss Marple a resume of the afternoon's happenings, recounting in detail everything that Miss Grenshaw had said to them. But I do think, said Horace, that there is something a little sinister about the whole setup. That Duchess-like creature, the housekeeper, arsenic perhaps, in the teapot. Now that she knows her mistress has made the will in her favor? Tell us, Jane, said Raymond. Will there be a murder or won't there? What do you think? I think, said Miss Marple, winding up her wool with a rather severe air, that you shouldn't joke about these things as much as you do, Raymond. Arsenic is, of course, quite a possibility. So easy to obtain. Probably present in the tool shed already in the form of weed killer. Oh, really, darling, said Joan West affectionately. Wouldn't that rather be too obvious? It's all very well to make a will, said Raymond. I don't suppose really the poor old thing has anything to leave except that awful white elephant of a house. And who would want that? A film company, possibly, said Horace. Or a hotel or an institution? They'd expect to buy it for a song, said Raymond, but Miss Marple was shaking her head. You know, dear Raymond, I cannot agree with you there. About the money, I mean. The grandfather was evidently one of those lavish spenders who make money easily but can't keep it. They may have gone broke, as you say, but hardly bankrupt, or else his son would have not had the house. Now the son, as is so often the case, was an entirely different character to his father. A miser, a man who saved every penny. I should say that in the course of his lifetime he probably put up a very good sum. This Miss Grenshaw appears to have taken after him, to dislike spending money, that is. Yes, I should think it quite likely that she had quite a good sum tucked away. In that case, said Joan West, I wonder now, what about Lou? They looked at Lou as she sat silently by the fire. Lou was Joan West's niece. Her marriage had recently, as she herself put it, come unstuck, leaving her with 2 young children and a bare sufficiency of money to keep them on. I mean, said Joan, if Miss Grenshaw really wants someone to go through diaries and get a book ready for publication. It's an idea, said Raymond. Lou said in a low voice, it's work I could do. I'd enjoy it. I'll write to her, said Raymond. I wonder, said Miss Marple thoughtfully, what the old lady meant by that remark about a policeman. Oh, it was just a joke. It reminded me, said Miss Marple, nodding her head vigorously. Yes, it reminded me very much of Mr. Naismith. And who was Mr. Naismith? Asked Raymond curiously. He kept bees, said Ms. Marple, and he was very good at doing the acrostics in the Sunday papers. And he liked giving people false impressions just for fun. But sometimes it led to trouble. Everybody was silent for a moment, considering Mr. Naismith, but as there did not seem to be any points of resemblance between him and Miss Grenshaw, they decided that dear Aunt Jane was perhaps getting a little bit disconnected in her old age. We're going to stop here, and this was Grenshaw's Folly, and I will pick up next week and finish the last story in the Agatha Christie book. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. My name is Nalani Brown. Have a wonderful day.